All right, we need to talk because uncertainty is at an all-time high. And in case you don't know what's going on, let me catch you up to speed. In 2024, Trump ran for presidency on the promise of imposing tariffs.
Tariff, properly used, is a beautiful word. One of the most beautiful words I've ever heard. It's music to my ears.
And in case you don't know, a tariff is a tax on imported goods. So let's say a Chinese company imports microwaves to the US. Without a tariff, that Chinese microwave might cost you $100. But then let's say the US decides to impose a 25% tariff on the microwaves imported from China. Well, in order to cover the cost of that tariff, the manufacturer often passes that extra 25% off to the customer. And now the microwave costs $125. Tariffs often increase the price of products because somebody has to pay for them. And because businesses are in the business to make money, that cost often trickles down to you, the consumer, in increased prices. However, Trump's argument for tariffs is that they will force companies to bring and build factories in the United States, bringing back American manufacturing jobs and creating more American goods, revitalizing the manufacturing age we had long ago. Making America great again. And since Trump's inauguration, he has followed through with his promise, and we have been seeing new tariffs imposed every day. Countries responding with their own tariffs, and headlines changing every single day. If you haven't been paying attention, a lot has been going on, but the climax of this story so far happened last Wednesday, April 2nd, on what he called Liberation Day, where he imposed what he calls reciprocal tariffs on basically all countries. And all of this has caused a lot of uncertainty in the markets. We have basically lost all gains from the last year. It's a scary time to be an investor, a consumer, an employee, or a business owner because the future is very uncertain and nobody knows how this is going to play out. And in this video, I want to talk about how this might affect you, common ways that people lose money in times like these, things that we shouldn't do, and things that we should do during these times. And so let's start off talking about how this might affect you. So chances are, this has already affected you in some way, and more than likely, it's affected you in a bad way. And the first way it might have affected you is that your 401k has taken a huge hit. If you are an investor watching this, it has probably been painful to look at your portfolio. I mean, a day after Liberation Day on Thursday when Trump announced the tariffs, the market dropped more than it has in the last 5 years. And basically, we've been seeing a mild version of this trend for the last 3 months, and we've lost over 1 year of gains in the last 3 months. I mean, in the past few months, my portfolio has dropped by so much money. It's a hard thing to see. I can't imagine if you're in retirement and you need to withdraw this money because it's a terrible time to withdraw. And we'll talk about what to do about this later. But the second way it might have affected you is potential increases in prices. So as I said, tariffs often just trickle down to consumers because somebody has to pay for this added cost. And one thing we'll potentially see later on is increases in prices on basically everything like auto parts, shoes, and clothes because this stuff is often made in other countries that we are now tariffing. And let's be honest, since COVID, prices have increased dramatically, and I don't think consumers can afford to take a much bigger hit. And the third way it might affect you is potentially causing a recession. These tariffs have created a lot of uncertainty, and uncertainty is never good in an economy because businesses might lay people off, consumers might spend less, and banks might stop lending money, which can cause a recession. I mean, I'm frugal, I don't need to tell you that, but I have even been spending less money and trying to save more just in case we do enter a recession. And imagine if everyone does that. That means that nobody is getting business and nobody is making money. So that could potentially cause a lot of problems. And those are 3 ways that this could affect you. And so now that we've spoken about that, let's now talk about the price you will pay for panicking in a bear market. So probably the immediate impact that you have experienced from all of this is your 401k or your investment portfolio losing value. And in times like these, when you're losing money every single day, people get emotional, panic, and make rash decisions, which causes them to lose a lot of money. And there are two common ways that people lose money, and let's not make these mistakes. The first way is selling at the bottom. It's easy to stay calm and imagine a good future when everything is going up and you are making money. But when things start to go down and you start losing money, people often panic and try to sell their investments. For example, in January, the market is at an all-time high and they're happy. And then it drops 10% a month later and get a bit nervous. Then on Liberation Day, they lose another 5%. And the next day it drops another 5%. And they panic thinking it will never recover and sell. That is how people lose money, because what often happens is over time the market recovers and starts going back up, but because they sold at the bottom, they lost 20% of their portfolio. If you are an investor, it's important to know and it's important to be reminded that when you buy an investment, like an index fund, you do not have money anymore, but you have shares. And even if the market drops by 10% like it has this past year and your portfolio has gone down thousands of dollars, you still have the same amount of shares. And as long as you don't panic sell, in the long term, your investment should recover. On a day-to-day basis, the market is dramatic because Wall Street is responding to the news of the day. But when you zoom out and look at the big picture, the market has always gone up in the last 100 years. If you haven't sold, even if your portfolio is down tens of thousands of dollars, you still have the same amount of shares. So don't get too caught up in the story of the day. Keep a level head and keep a long-term mindset because nobody knows where we are in the market cycle. And the second mistake people make is depleting their emergency fund. When markets are down, it is actually a great time to buy because if you're optimistic that things will recover in the long term, then everything is on sale. For example, if you saw a shirt you loved and the next day it was 25% off, you wouldn't say, "I don't want it anymore," but you'd buy it. And this is the same with investments. If you believe that Apple is a good company, and all of a sudden the stock price is down 10%, if you believe it's a good company, you would still buy it and think that you're getting a deal because in the long term, you would believe it will gain value. However, this is a trap that often everyday people with limited money lose big time, and this is how. Say you have an emergency fund of $10,000 and the market goes down 5%. So you buy $3,000 because it's on sale. Then it goes down another 5%. So you buy another $3,000 because it's on sale. Then another $3,000 because it's on sale. But then imagine you lose your job and you have no emergency fund, so you have to sell your investments at the bottom, losing money. In times like these, you will hear so many people saying that millionaires are made in recessions. However, as a normal person, you more than likely don't have a never-ending supply of money to keep buying the dip in the market. And you could risk depleting your emergency fund, which could cause you to sell at a huge loss. It's important to protect your emergency fund in case you lose your job or something unexpected happens because nobody knows what the future will hold and how this will play out. And so people often lose money when they panic, get emotional, and make rash decisions. Right now, this is a rich person's game being played and they won't lose because they are playing with somebody else's money. You will lose if you panic, so stay level-headed and protect your emergency fund and protect your investments. And so the final thing that I want to talk about in this video is things that we shouldn't do and things that we should do in times of chaos. And so let's start by talking about what we shouldn't do. Alright, in these chaotic times, the first thing that we shouldn't do is try to time the market. So as I explained, trying to time the market is a huge mistake because it causes people to lose a lot of money by selling at the bottom or buying at the top. Nobody knows where we are in the market cycle. For example, in the 2020 COVID crash, the market dropped a lot and many people panicked, but then it recovered just as quickly. Maybe the market's going to drop another 20%, or maybe next month, all this is going to be over and it's going to recover. I don't know, you don't know, nobody knows. And so we shouldn't try to time the market because that is when we lose big time. The second thing we shouldn't do is be obsessed with the news. Right now, the news is making a lot of money because they are sensationalizing everything. And when you watch too much of the news, your reality often gets distorted. You start to think that things are worse than they actually are and start making harmful decisions. It's best to limit your consumption and focus on the things you can control, like budgeting, spending less, and controlling your emotions. And just focusing on our small space in the world. And the third thing that we shouldn't do is be careless with our spending. Right now, there's a lot of uncertainty in the air, and we don't know what the future will hold. And so it's important to be conscious with your spending and not just spend willy-nilly, think that this is not a big deal and it's not going to impact you, because it could impact you and put you in a tough financial spot. So tighten up your spending, be more conscious so you have more to weather through this storm. And so now that we talked about the things that we shouldn't do, now let's talk about the things that we should do. So as individuals, basically all this stuff that is going on is completely out of our control. The only thing that we have control over is how we choose to respond to this stuff. And the first thing that we can do is be proactive with our personal finances. We have no control over how the market will do, how secure our jobs are, or what will happen in the future. And so we shouldn't focus too much on that stuff. But we have a lot more control over what goes on in our own lives. And if we choose to be proactive with it, that can make a huge difference. And so it's important to examine your budget, track your expenses and eliminate waste, live below your means, hold off on big purchases, protect your emergency fund, and be more frugal. Doing those things is going to help you out a lot more than doom scrolling the news. The second thing we should do is keep a long-term perspective. In times like these, it's so easy to get consumed in the story of today, thinking that the sky is falling and bad times will never end. However, when you zoom out and look at the big picture, despite wars, bubbles, housing crashes, and pandemics, the market has always found a way forward. I heard one person say, read books, not news articles. Think in decades, not days. Keep a long-term perspective, be patient and think rationally. And finally, be ready for a wild ride. I personally believe that this is just the beginning of this story. I think the damage is done and we are headed towards a lot of change, but I am just a guy on the internet. I am not here to tell you what you should believe or who to be mad about, but I do think it's important to acknowledge that we are headed towards a lot of change because a lot has happened. So don't panic. Focus on the things you can control and toughen up because a lot is changing. I would love to hear your thoughts on all of this in the comment section. Try to be nice to each other, although I know you probably won't listen. But with that, muchas gracias, que tengan un buen día. Nos vemos, chica, que viva, no sé.